Good afternoon, bot builders, or good evening, or good morning, depending on what time it is in the world for wherever you're joining us from. I want to say happy Halloween to those of us who observe this day. If that is something that you're interested in doing, I will say that Halloween has not always been my holiday. I am much more of a, later on in the year kind of fellow. But for all of you who enjoyed the spookies and the scaries, I hope that you're enjoying yourselves. Where's my costume? I thought about wearing a costume for today's stream, but I thought that might get a bit cumbersome if I was wearing like big plastic fangs. So instead, I just wore a comfortable sweater because it's nice and cold outside here in Montreal, where I'm streaming from. All right, I've got a fun stream planned for all of us today. Perhaps fun is subjective, but I've got an informative stream planned for all of us today. If you are a mainstay on our YouTube channel, at the end of last week, you would have seen me upload a video about conversational memory. So the plan for today's stream is we'll talk a bit about what it means to have conversational memory, what that defines, let's say, and then how you can actually pop it into your chatbot as well. So that's kind of the overview for today's stream. But as always, I'm going to say, hi, I'm Robert. If you're new here, these are the basics office hours. So we go over things like basic tasks and actions in Botpress, and you're more than welcome. In fact, you are strongly encouraged to ask questions. Don't worry about derailing the course of the stream or being off topic or whatever. I'm really here to chat with you guys. So I usually have a plan planned, but of course, I'm always looking to go off plan. What is the purpose of a plan if not to be derailed altogether? So hello, everyone. So let's talk a bit about conversational memory. Let's talk a bit about how AI can help you do this and how you can set this up in Botpress. I think the first thing is perhaps let's begin with an example. So if I were to say to you, chat, what kind of sandwich would you like? And you say to me, ham. I would understand that what you're saying, what you're telling me is I would like a ham sandwich. But of course, as humans, it's a bit silly to continue back and forth in that way. It feels very like I'm writing an elementary school book report. And so, of course, I understand ham to mean I want a ham sandwich. And so conversational memory kicks in because I remember that I just asked you a question and I'm able to infer based on what you told me that what you're actually telling me is I would like a ham sandwich. You're not just telling me about ham. Now, of course, when interacting with chatbots and in computer systems, it can be difficult for a computer to in fact, impossible for a computer to understand what you are telling it in the context of a conversation unless it has access to that conversation. And so what I mean by that is chatbots in general have no way of remembering all the previous things that you've asked it unless you instruct it to in some way. So there are a couple of things to note here. Chatbot builders have been around for a very long time. So if you've been on the internet for any time in the last 15 years, it's likely you've interacted with a chatbot, and it's very likely that perhaps you felt dissatisfied or you felt like the conversation was a bit robotic and you couldn't quite put your finger on why. I would say one of the biggest reasons for that is a lack of conversational memory, right? It didn't feel like you were having a natural conversation with another human being or something that was approaching a human being because of this lack of conversational memory. So one of the things that Botpress does really well is it builds these features directly in the studio, so you don't have to go out of your way to enable conversational memory. It should be pretty simple for you. So to that end, let's discuss how we go about and do this. If what I've been saying to you sounds like something that should be like a global setting or something that should affect the entirety of the conversation with your bot, and perhaps if you're a seasoned bot builder, there may be some alarm bells are going off in your head. But of course, the thing that we're going to be looking for first is the agents menu. Now, a quick little refresher for those of us who are, perhaps the uninitiated. Agents in Botpress, you can think of these as little things happening behind the scenes or little worker bees making sure that things happen behind the scenes so the conversation goes as smoothly as possible. Let's work with some examples. The knowledge agent, for instance, is the thing that allows your bot to answer questions. So this is the setting or this is the tool that's happening behind the scenes that tells your bot, you know this, and this is how you should answer this question. I think a good example of this kind of conversational memory in action is what's happening down here. So in the knowledge agent menu, there's an option to provide context to your knowledge base. And basically what that means is here's the context that you might find helpful for this conversation in order to make it a bit more conversational or natural or dynamic or human. So for example, this field is editable, but by default, we include this, which should be helpful for 90%, 95% of your conversations. But let's do a deep dive on what each of these things means. So remember, we're in the knowledge agent menu right now. And what I want to be able to do is tell my knowledge agent or tell my bot, this is what you know, and this is how you know it, and this is how you should answer these questions. And so in doing so, we're going to provide these two variables. You can tell they're variables either because they're highlighted in green, which means they resolve correctly, or they're denoted by these curly braces, or perhaps both together. But let's talk a bit about where do these variables come from? What the heck is this? So I'll exit the knowledge agent menu and I'll pop into the summary agent menu. So I'll just open it up over here. And really the summary agent is your bread and butter for enabling conversational memory. You can think of this like the part of your brain that allows you to remember conversations and then continue enacting it in real time. I think maybe a useful analogy here is like, you know, when you're having a conversation with someone and your brain totally just shuts off, you ask them a question, but you forget to listen to their response, so you have no idea what the heck they just said. You can think of that like your summary agent stopped working for a minute, right? Like it just didn't work and you kind of gave up on it, or it gave up on you. And so you can think of the summary agent in that way. So we've got a couple of configuration options here. I will leave these for now. You can leave your default settings and trust that they'll be pretty good for most cases. And then what I'm going to say is let's talk about these exposed variables. Remember, a variable in Botpress is just a piece of information or a piece of data that you can refer to later. And it's a dynamic piece of data. So it's based on maybe user input or the context of the conversation so far. So remember, these little icons means that this is a string variable or text. String is just programming language for a piece of text. And so both exposed variables here are going to be strings. Let's talk about the first one that I think is the better place to start, which is the transcript. So the conversation.summaryagent.transcript variable, this is automatically created, automatically updated, so you don't have to do anything on your end to enable this setting. It's happening automatically behind the scenes. And this is a transcript of the entire conversation so far. You can think of this like, if you're familiar with the concept of a court stenographer, right? Just somebody who is sitting at a court and typing everything that everybody has said so far. That's what your bot is doing behind the scenes, or that's what the summary agent is doing rather. So this is producing a variable of every message that your bot sends and your user sends, and it's able to just store that in this nice little transcript variable. That's really good if you want like a detailed account of the conversation so far. That's one way to approach that. And the next thing, the next variable that we expose is the same thing, but .summary instead of .transcript. And so what the summary does is it takes that transcript, uses AI to summarize it down into maybe a couple of sentences, because let's say your transcript is getting very long, or there's a lot of back and forth that's irrelevant to your bot, and you want it to be able to do the same thing just with a small summary of the conversation. Perhaps a quick aside here, the topic of today's stream is enabling conversational memory, so having a back and forth with your bot that feels a bit more natural. I'm sure you're all familiar with ChatGPT. ChatGPT does this very well by enabling this kind of conversation memory, and so what we're trying to do is replicate that. Equally, however, if you're in a customer service setting, or if you're in, let's say, product management and you want to solicit feedback for your bot, or whatever the case may be, you'll find both of these things very helpful. Let's say you are soliciting like a survey or a feedback from users of your software, and you want both the nitty-gritty, so the very detailed accounts that software users tend to give of things like the bugs they run into, or perhaps a summary of the entire conversation they had with your chatbot. These variables are also saved for you, the bot owner, so you can save these, for example, to a table and then work with them later to understand where are my users having problems. So two things I've said here. The first thing is that these are very useful in the context of allowing your bot to behave conversationally in a more dynamic or human way. But like most things in Botpress, everything is there for you to be creative with and do what you want with. And we try our best to not limit the kinds of actions you can take with, for example, the variables that we expose to you. The idea here is we expect you and we encourage you to get creative and do things with your bots that maybe we're not even expecting. In fact, I can 100% confirm every single day there's someone out there on Discord doing things with a bot that we didn't think was at all possible. That's all very lovely. We love to see it. So continue doing that. All right, so just to recap where we've gotten so far, we have the summary agent, and this is saving the conversation every step of the way. So we have one variable that is going to allow us to summarize the conversation and somehow feed it back to our bot such that it's going to be responding in a natural way, taking into account what the previous message was. So how do we actually do this? What does this look like in terms of how do I set up my workflow, or what do I do? If you watched the video I uploaded to the Botpress YouTube channel on Friday of last week, if you're watching this recording in the future on YouTube, you can find that video elsewhere on our channel. But if you watch the conversational memory video, you should know what I'm about to do here. But let's do a deep dive in what I've got going on here. So I've popped an AI task into my bot, and this is the only node I have so far for the purpose of this example. Of course, you can place this directly in a workflow you already have, but for the purpose of this example, I'm just going to show you how to do it on a basic node like this one. So in this blank node, I've popped an AI task, and I've pre-populated the instructions in the input. So let's do a deep dive on why I set this up this way, why the settings are this way, what this means. If you watch that video on our YouTube channel, I don't normally dive into the whys of these things in order to keep those videos brief, but I am going to dive into the why now because as you all know, I'm a chatterbox and this box loves to chatter. All right, so let's talk about the AI task. The first thing that you'll see when you open an AI task is you're prompted to include instructions. What we've done with our AI task, which is really just a catch-all card that can do a lot of different things based on what you ask it to or tell it to. You can think of this as the part of sending a ChatGPT message where you're telling it what you want it to do, what you want ChatGPT to get done. But the benefit of the AI task is that you can have it, for example, access your data or the previous conversation that a user has had with your bot. It's not just a one-to-one tool that you're using on your own. So you can think of this as the part where you're telling ChatGPT what you want it to do, and you can think of the input, so the next form that you need to fill out, the next field, as what you're giving ChatGPT access to. A good example of this that I assume perhaps a lot of you will be familiar with is giving it like a blog post or an article and asking it to summarize it for you. So here you might say something like, please summarize this article, and then here is the article itself. We've separated those out into two different fields, so it's clearer to you what you should be putting where. I think a lot of one of the learning curves of ChatGPT is you have to do everything in one, but users don't often expect that, and in fact there are other ways to manage that user experience. Okay, let us return back to the AI task that we have in front of us. So here, for these task instructions, what I've told my bot is, you're a helpful assistant. I will give you a transcript between assistant and user. So let's talk about why I set this up this way. Also, I have to shout out Patrick, who helped me set this up. I cannot take full credit for having done this. But as we all know, bot building truly takes a village. So why are these things set up this way? First off, you are a helpful assistant. So I'm going to say the reason this is here, I think this is pretty clear. The bot is the assistant and it should be helpful. So we're telling it what its personality is and also the role that it has in this conversation. The assistant part of this sentence is pretty necessary because then I say I, the bot owner, will give you, the assistant, a transcript between assistant and user. So what I'm telling the bot here is you're the assistant and I'm going to give you a transcript between you, the assistant, and my user. This way, we're making it very clear who is talking to who in this conversation. So as always with prompting, and especially the AI task here, being as specific as possible is going to yield, in general, better results. You want to be as specific and detailed as possible without over-indexing on too many details. If you spend time in the AI space, you know that prompting is surely an art. And so I would say take some time to craft a prompt that works for your use case in the way that, for example, Patrick helped me craft this one. Let's talk about what happens next. You must come up with a new assistant response to the last user response. So rather than say something like, you must come up with a response based on what the user has said, we're being as specific as possible. So we're leaving nothing up to chance. We're not implying anything. Everything is explicitly clear. You, the bot, or the assistant, must come up with a new assistant response, i.e. your response, the bot, to the last user response. Not the last message, not the last thing said, but we're saying the last user response. Because we know that we've told the bot it's having a conversation with a user, and so now we know whose response this is. Maybe like a little brief aside here, we do a lot of math behind the scenes in our heads, in our brains as humans to understand context, that if we don't tell an AI model to do this, it's not going to do this on its own. We take a lot of these things for granted because we've been communicating as humans for so long. But for example, if we just said the last response, our bot wouldn't always know if we're talking about my last response or the bot's last response or the user's last response. And so those are things that we take for granted. We fill in with context that LLMs find very difficult to do. So again, we're being as specific as possible here. The last thing I'll say on this note is that just because it worked once, for example, on ChatGPT, doesn't always mean that the same prompt will work elsewhere in the world for different models or even for ChatGPT again, right? And so predictability is something that we're very keen on ensuring, both for you and for us. So being able to assign or prompt models in a way that is going to yield predictable results is, of course, very important. Especially when you're working in a customer service setting. I think when you're doing this for fun, it can be a little delightful to see things that maybe are unexpected. But of course, you want to minimize hallucinations when you're deploying these in like an enterprise setting, or even if you're a freelancer or whatever the case may be. So that's what I would say here. That's why the sentence might read odd as at first when we read this as humans, because we're not used to speaking in this way. But it's a good exercise, I suppose, in clarity. All right, let's look at the last thing I've got in the instructions here. You can see I've swapped over to bullet points here. That's because these are less ambiguous, or these statements are less prone to ambiguity than what I was saying previously. So the message must be as friendly as possible, ask questions, respond in 50 words or less. When you're dealing with things that are programmatic, or like these instructions are, you have a little more leeway to be less you can be a bit more rigid in the way that you're prompting the model to do something. So here we're saying ask questions. We're not saying ask several questions. We're not saying be as inquisitive as you can. We're just saying ask questions. I think one of the big problems that I see both on like users that are having trouble with the AI task, but then also questions about prompting in general, is people mix up when sentences are prone to ambiguity and when they're not. This is also true. I mean, I will soapbox for a second here, and I will say this was also true before the era of ChatGPT and LLMs and AI in general. I think communication is something that we all know we all could improve on and is very important. And I think the hallmark of good communication is understanding when are things prone to ambiguity and when do I need to dispel that ambiguity. So I think when we talk about prompting being a skill, it's really just an extension of that communication skill that people either had already developed in life or had gotten by without it. So if you're having trouble prompting, what I would say is one of the most helpful things is understanding where are the prompts you're giving LLMs? Are they prone to ambiguity? Is how much filling in the blanks are you expecting the AI you're working with to do? And is there any way you can minimize that? And equally, for the latter portion of this example, are there places where you're introducing ambiguity where actually it would be really good to be as programmatic as possible? Of course, the only way to get better at something is by learning and doing and practicing. And so I would say just keep at it and keep those guidelines in mind. All right, I'm going to step down from my soapbox now, and we're going to pop over to the AI task input, which should be a little simpler. So remember, up here, this is where we're telling our bot, this is how you're responding, this is what I want you to do, this is how I want you to do it. And here is where we're telling our bot, this is the information you have to work with. These are your sources, figure something out based on this information. So the first piece of information we're going to give it is the transcript. Remember, we just went over what the summary agent does. So we're giving it the entire transcript of the conversation. If you're curious, and I, of course, encourage all of you to be curious all the time, replace the transcript with the conversation summary and see how your bot's ability to respond differs. It might be better for your use case. It might be providing unsatisfactory answers, maybe vice versa. Maybe the summary is better for you versus the transcript. But I would say the transcript is a good place to start. And then if you find that something's not working properly, give the summary a try as well. But it's always a good idea to experiment a little back and forth. That's what the studio or the emulator is there for you to do. So we've given it the transcript. This is where we're saying, if you were here at the beginning of the stream, this is where we're saying, I asked my user for a sandwich. They're not just talking to me about ham. They're telling me they want a ham sandwich. This is how your bot will remember that. We've also given it the last user message. And remember, in the instructions, we told it, I will give you, the bot, a transcript between you, the assistant, and the user. So the bot is expecting something to do with the user, and that's what's happening here. So we're saying the last user message is event.preview. If you're wondering about what this variable means, what the heck is event.preview, this just stores the last thing that your user sent. You can find helpful formulas like event.preview and others over here in the quick reference tab, which you can access by clicking on resources, that question mark in the bottom left corner. And you can see event.preview is the top one up here. All right, the last thing I'm going to say on the topic of setting up this AI task is we're storing the result in this variable called workflow.response, which we will then be able to access later. So this is the AI task. I'm going to pause here because that was a lot of talking on my end. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about the AI task so far? I feel like if you've played with the AI task, it's very simple and understanding it is intuitive. But for the first time, and I felt this as well, the first time you look at the AI task, it can be a bit odd or it can be a bit confusing. So are there any questions or thoughts about the AI task before I move forward? If not, I'm happy to just continue setting up this this conversational memory card because there's a few more steps that we've got to go through before we get to the beautiful conversational memory step that we're after, right? I see a couple of people typing. This always means that I've said something. Can we ask the AI task to keep getting user profile data until fully filled out? Yeah, you can. So there are two ways that you can capture user profile data. You can just use the programmatic capture cards, so just the set of cards that we have over here, or you can also ask the AI task to do it itself, save those to a variable, and then you can tell it, for example, keep redoing this until all are full. There are a couple of different ways to set up that loop, but you can absolutely ask the AI task to do that. Here, what we're doing is we're just asking the AI task to come up with answers. But in terms of interacting with users, you can do that as well. Setting up the prompt is going to look a little different. But that might actually be a helpful topic for a future video, is asking the AI task to collect or work with user data. Shabscan, I hope that answers your question. And thank you. It's a good one. Alrighty. So here, we've told our AI task to send a message. The message is going to be saved in a variable. But the next thing is, what the heck, when the heck does my user say anything? When is my user going to respond to this? Of course, your bot is going to continue executing these cards until we get to the very end of a node, which it does here. And the AI task on its own won't capture information from a user. We need to include a capture card somehow. So since I'm looking for a free-form conversational experience, I'm going to place, of course, a raw input card. So I'll just pop one over here. And so now let's remind ourselves what's going to happen. The AI task will resolve. So my bot should read the conversation history, come up with a new message, and then save it to that variable. That variable is what we're going to use as our prompt for the raw input card. And so hopefully this is something that you all knew. And if not, I'm very happy to share this with you. But the form field entry for the input cards, capture cards rather, support variables. So instead of asking the same question every time, we're able to ask the user or prompt the user with a question that the AI task has come up with. So that's what's happening here. The AI task is going to be reading the entirety of the conversation, coming up with an original response, and then sending that original response here while it's capturing information. So it's doing all these things at the same time. Okay, so we're missing one last step in this loop in order to make sure that this is happening properly. And that's that, of course, if we want this to be a loop, we're going to need some kind of transition. So I'm just going to use an always transition to move myself right back to the beginning of the loop. And so you can see here, always moves me back to the beginning of the loop, and we are in a circle. And it brings me there. Okay. So let's take a look at this AI task before I begin interacting with it. Let's see what we think is going to happen. Let's hypothesize what we expect to happen and understand, is it working or is it not? And if not, then we'll be able to isolate why not. So this is what I expect to happen so far. I expect my AI task to read the response, come up with a new response, send it over here in the capture card, capture what my user says, redirect me back to the beginning of the node, where I expect my bot to read the conversation history, come up with an original response and relevant, and then continue executing these cards in a loop. So let's test it out. Let's see what happens. I'll say hi. So it's reading, it's what the heck did I say so far? And then of course it's just saying, how can I assist you today? Because it is a helpful AI assistant. And so now I'm gonna ask it a question. And I'll say something like, tell me something about tea. And so let's see what it says about tea. I'm drinking tea today, so that's what I'm expecting. And then we see here it's giving me some information about tea and then asking me a question because I told it to ask me questions. And so what specific information am I looking for about tea? Is it tasty? Now, I'm going to stop before I send this message, and I want to note one thing down. If I say, is it tasty to you, with no context, if I come up to you on the street and I say, is it tasty, you're going to have no idea what the heck I'm talking about, and rightfully so. That analogy, so the idea of going up to someone, a stranger on the street, and saying, is it tasty, is exactly what most chatbots do. So without any context, it's not going to be able to understand. But remember, we went through the work of setting this up because we want our bot to remember, the user asked me about tea, I told them some general information about tea, and now they want to know if it's tasty. So that's what's going on here. So normally, we wouldn't expect bots to be able to understand what it refers to here. But in this case, of course, my bot is able to say, yes, tea is known for its delicious taste, et cetera, and then asks me a question again. Shabscan asks another excellent question in chat, which I was going to get to later on, but I think I'll get to it now because this seems like a relevant question. So they say, can we control the temperature of the model so that we get less hallucinations? Yes, absolutely you can. As Sabrina mentioned in chat just there, you can control the temperature in advanced settings, but I have a couple of helpful notes of feedback for those of us that don't understand or aren't used to what temperature means. So you can see I have mine set at a solid 0.5. If you're looking to get, if you're answering from a knowledge base or you're working with things where accuracy is paramount, so for example, you have information that needs to be accurate 100% of the time, you should set your temperature lower. This is the amount that you're allowing your bot to deviate or come up with creative answers, let's say, to translate that into non-statistics language. So a lower temperature means that you are closer to the accuracy of the answer. And then a higher temperature means you're giving your bot a little more freedom to be creative or get a little wonky with its answers. Higher temperature means that we're expecting there to be more hallucination, which sometimes is okay. Sometimes hallucination is just an interesting part of conversation, but let's say you're providing customer service, you want to, of course, minimize that temperature. You can find that in the advanced settings of the AI task. Steffi says, does the natural conversation work exactly the same with the AI response card and raw input when I use a knowledge base? Steffi, that's a good question. What I would say is it wouldn't work the exact same way because what's happening right now is my bot is answering from information that it's pulling from ChatGPT. So this is, we're using GPT. You can actually see the model that we're using behind the scenes here. Or I suppose on the scene, on the front stage, because the information is right here. But you can see we're pulling the information from GPT 3.5 Turbo. So this is not pulling information from your knowledge base. What I will say is you can absolutely integrate the AI task with answering questions from a knowledge base. We've got a video on our YouTube channel about how to do that. But the idea here is like your bot can answer from your knowledge base, or it can answer from GPT 3.5 Turbo, or it can do both, depending on how you've set up your bot. So the first thing I would say is watch that video on integrating the AI task in the knowledge base, and then go from there. So that doesn't really answer your question. It sort of does, sort of doesn't, but there are a couple of different ways to go about doing that. The question I would just ask back to you if we were developing this bot back and forth is to say, what do you want to happen? So do you want your bot to answer a question and then do something else with that information? Do you want your bot to answer a question in a certain way, say with bullet points or in under a certain amount of sentences? Or do you want your bot to speak with a certain personality? There are a couple of different things. So when you're building a bot, the question here is like, what is it that you're trying to achieve and what is the best way to go about doing that? Okay, so we covered temperature, we covered model, and then I'm gonna swap this back to 0.5, which is where I keep it as a default. And so that's what's going on here. Let's test this one more time just to make sure that it's working. And I didn't invent this. Does somebody in chat want to give me a noun? or something I can ask a question about, something that GPT might reasonably know something about. So don't tell me about like your grandmother's lunch. Yeah, okay, tell me something about cats. That's actually something, that's something I would have come up with. Oh no, not cars. Okay, wait, sorry. Get out of here. Tell me something about cats. All right, so the AI task is working. Cats are known for being independent and curious animals. They're also known for being cuties. Do you have any specific questions about cats? Let's think about what a reasonable person might say. What if we say something like, do they make good house pets? Now, let's, once again, before I hit enter here and send this message, the word they is totally meaningless without the context of this conversation. What I mean by this is if I came up to you on the street and I said, do they make good pets? You would have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. But of course, we expect our bot to be able to know what I'm talking about based on the conversation that we've given it so far. One thing I want to highlight here is just a few short years ago, this was completely unimaginable, or the ease with which we set this up was just completely unimaginable. The ability to give a computer something to remember and then respond back in a natural way is really difficult, and it's I hope I'm impressing upon you the exciting way that how far we've come. Let's say it's very exciting. It's very nice to see. So here I'll say, do they make good house pets? And then of course we'll pop it right here. We say absolutely, cats make wonderful house pets, etc., etc. And then of course it asks me another question because I told my bot to continue asking me questions. The goal here is to continue having a conversation, and good conversation relies on questions. So here we have conversations about cats. Shabkan, I hope, do you have a cat? I hope that answers your question. And I hope this is also your experience with cats as well. It certainly was mine. So maybe the last thing I'll show you before I pop off for today's stream is I'm going to show you how to exit this loop, how you can allow your user to say, get me out of here. I want to do something else. I don't want to have this conversation with your bot anymore. Before I do that, I've got more questions. Can we do something where the AI shows a set of default prompts, but also allows free text inputs from users? Yeah, that's interesting. So what you'd like to do, if I'm understanding correctly, is allow, instead of a raw input card here, provide like card options. Is that what you're saying? So provide options for the user to interact with it itself. That's interesting. So that's currently not built into the AI task. I wonder if perhaps you could get around that, or the best way to go about doing this would just be to provide a single choice or multiple choice capture card here, get that prompt from the user, and then feed the response to that prompt to the AI task, which of course you can do. Can we try to practicalize using the AI chat or without the always loop just to see how it answers? Dr. Job, what do you mean by practicalize using the AI chat? Without the always loop, it's not going to, it'll answer once and that's about it, which is not the most helpful. But Dr. Job, perhaps like maybe the question I would ask you is, what are you trying to achieve with that? And what is it you would like to see? That's where I would begin with that. Manny says, isn't there a loop limit or was that removed? You ask a very good question. So over here in the gear, if we go into chatbot settings, you can see node repetition limit. And then you can move this up or down based on how many times you want that a repetition limit. Currently, it's finished at 10. So that's the loop limit that you are referring to. All right. As we continue our questions, I will just show you how to set up this intent loop to allow your user to pull the ripcord and leave this node. So I'll just pop that in here. Multi-choice will not allow free text inputs, right? I want a few default options, but allow the user to give his own choice as well. Shabs can actually no. So the nice thing about all of our capture cards is your user can either click a button, so they can click yes or no, or they can just type it in. So free text will work on capture cards. We designed them such that you can click a button or send a message as your user prefers. It's up to the user. Exactly, as Sabrina says. All right, so let's talk a bit about what's going on here based on this intent. So we've prompted our user for a response. This is where my bot has asked a question. And what I want my bot to do is listen and say, Well, answer this question unless the user wants to end the conversation. So I have an intent already set up called end conversation that will allow the user to end the conversation. And just to verify that that's working, let's pop that over to another node here. And I'll just say the conversation is over, just to verify that it's working. And of course, if this intent node is not triggered, then the loop will continue as expected. So here I'll say hi. And then finally, I'll say something like, tell me something about stickers. Bum, ba, da, bum. And then what is the best color for one? What is the best color for a sticker? And of course, one here refers to stickers. And we see our bot was able to correctly recognize that. So we see the intent node wasn't triggered, or the intent card wasn't triggered, so we continue the loop. And now I'll just say something like, I'd like to end the conversation in order to trigger that intent. And we're done. Why didn't this end? Much to think about later, but in any case. What is the difference between using this AI task versus code to use a ChatGPT with account? I don't think that there is a difference. Manny, I'm not really, are you talking about using execute code to call the ChatGPT API? Is that what the question is? In theory, there shouldn't be a difference. I mean, I suppose the main difference is that this is significantly simpler because you don't have to touch the execute code card. But if you're a programmer and you're interested in using that, then more power to you, of course. But in theory, there should be practically no difference. What I will say is that we do some caching on the back end to the prompts that we send to ChatGPT in order to hopefully improve accuracy, make the conversation run smoother, et cetera, et cetera. But in theory, there shouldn't be a difference, as you, I think, are implying here. So that's right. Shabscan says, do I have to change some setting in validation? No, you shouldn't have to. By default, all input cards, whether raw input cards or choices, will support free text input. So Shabscan, you don't have to do anything. I would say just give it a shot in the emulator and you'll see what we mean by that. All right, let's recap what we did. I'm going to end the stream in a couple of minutes. So as usual, I'm going to say ask some questions or forever hold your bot building piece. While I recap this, feel free to just ask some questions in chat. So what we did today was we enabled a node that is going to allow our bot to engage conversationally with our users. To do that, we started with an AI task that leverages the summary agent, which is a tool that works behind the scenes in Botpress that takes the conversation it's had so far, your bot, with the user and summarizes it into one neat variable that you can use to provide your bot with conversation for context for the conversation it's been having so far. We set up these nodes in such a way that you'll be able to have a back and forth with your bot in a way that makes sense and hopefully is delightful for your user, particularly those users who are used to interacting with chatbots that are maybe like unsatisfactory, let's say. We set this up in a loop, but then equally, we have an intent here that is going to allow the user to pull the ripcord. You might notify the user about this, for example, here or in a separate text card as you please. But really, the way that you design this loop and this flow is entirely up to you. All right. Well, so that was the context of, that was the entirety that I had planned for today's stream. I hope that this is helpful for you. If you are watching this on YouTube later on in the future, I'm going to say, stop by the stream sometime. Give us a shout. If you're currently here, make sure to just subscribe or what's the word? Register for next week's stream, because I'll be continuing stuff like this. I will say there were some pretty good questions about the AI task earlier, so perhaps I'll make this like a little mini series about the AI task. I know some of you have been asking for this for a while, and so perhaps it's time that we finally dive into the AI task here as well. Matt Pendle says, how can we access all the user variable values? You should be able to do that via the variables panel in the bottom left here. So just the all variables here, you could just go to user variables and you can see I don't have any in my bot. The values will show up as they're filled in for each user. But your variables panel here in the bottom left will be your best friend. All right, that is all. Have a safe and fun Halloween, everybody. I hope that you all have a wonderful morning or evening or afternoon, depending on, of course, what time it is for you where you are. And finally, happy bot building. See you later.